how many lions have you run into outside of your work and outside,
Just
outside of
random.
tracking them? Yeah.
Yeah. So outside of like hounds and outside of like flying, I flew elk surveys and sheep and goats and bear telemetry, that's kind of cheating too, because you're in the air. But now and again, I'd see you jump a cat, right? From a helicopter or a fixed wing plane doing wildlife surveys. But probably um, only in, over 30 years messing around in the mountains, six or seven. However, there's no doubt in my mind, they're watching me, right? They're
Yeah.
there. They know. It's just they're the masters of disguise and sitting still and not moving.
That's a really impressive number that you've seen. You must move very quietly because they've. This is a question that has been asked on this network in other interviews
Mhm.
with these
Mhm.
old school houndsmen who've hunted for 70
Yep.
years, and many of them say 0 to 3 outside of
Yep.
you know
Yep.
uh,
Mhm. Here it's so I'm in probably the highest natural density of mountain lions, cougars, whatever you want to call them, in the West. So North Idaho, kind of probably from Coeur d'Alene north, and from Missoula north to southern, a little band of southern BC. Normally there's 2 to 4 adults per 100 square kilometers. And we did the DNA work right before I retired. Molly Parks, she's the carnivore lead for Montana now. And we popped up about 4.9, almost 5. And years and years ago, Morris Hornacher, who's kind of like the patron saint of mountain lions, he's in Idaho. He lives in Haley, right? Morris is retired, but he's a pioneer of mountain lion work. And Howard Quigley, who just passed a couple months ago, who's also it was in Idaho. Um, Howard and Morris always were talking to me about we need to look at densities where you're at. It's a continuous canopy cover from northern Idaho to here. It changes when you get into glacier and out onto the prairie. It opens wide open, right? But it's also a continuous distribution of meat with feet, and that's white-tailed deer. And white-tailed deer are more dense than mule deer and elk in summer range. Elk bunch up on winter. You can get 2, 3,000, 4,000 in a lot, but there's summer distributions, they thin out, right? But whitetails are very dense and predictable, so they support a lot of mountain lions and wolves up here. And so the odds of seeing more are greater up here than probably anywhere else, even with the trees, if you're out in the backcountry.
mhm. You talk in the book a little bit about when opening a quota and the sort of dialogue between hunters, biologists, and all the parties involved, and it was got really tense. But uh, is it too easy to hunt mount for? I've just been hound hunting for the last 2 years, and I've been raising my own pups, so it's been I'm hunting only on foot,
Yep.
and I have caught 2 lions, and both of those were me walking down in front of the trail as opposed to the dog. So
Yeah. Yeah.
for me it's been thousands of miles versus and very little catching, but it's been amazing.
You're
But
doing old school.
yeah, but not no, I should get a snowmobile. But but you seem to suggest that when they hit the quota really quickly in that instance in the book, that it's too easy for to catch lions on snow. Do you think that
Well,
is your problem that there's you think the fair chase element is not there?
mm, no, the fair chase is there. The problem is it's a classic supply and demand. The supply of lions, you have a natural density that you're never going to get above, and that's at 2 to 4. Up here, it's a little greater, right? And
Could you tell us what the density is? I think
oh,
people would like
oh,
to know
so
that.
2 to 4 resident adults, 2 to 4 per 100 square kilometers, and here it jumps up to close to 5, right? So
Mhm.
it's the highest in the West that typically they're on white-tailed deer. We have a lot of cats, right? They support a lot of cats, frankly, a lot of wolves now too, and that's a whole nother dynamic, right? Because the wolves will eat the hounds at times. But the supply and demand issue is even with that, people want a male. They want a big male. Most hunters that are out that have a license. And it was a wide open quota before we went to a special limited entry draw. So what happened was we had clubs that would live all year and to come out here from Michigan, Wisconsin, Washington, Oregon, they come to Idaho and Montana because they know we got cats, we got public lands where they don't have to knock on a door and ask for permission. They can just go out into the mountains. And then the most consistent variable there is snow. December 1, typically in North Idaho and Northwest Montana, there is tracking snow on the ground, perfect conditions. Most places, that's not the case. Basin and range where it's dry in the valley, snowy up high, we have snow all over. So people were coming from all over. And then there's a commercial part. So, and I don't blame them at all, but guides and outfitters, there's money to be made, right? You can get up to $5,000, $6,000 for a cat, for a non-resident client. So that was wide open. So you had all the resident houndmen. Then we had all the visiting houndmen that weren't with an outfitter. They were just clubs coming from all over the country. And then we had the outfitters and guides. And everyone would descend upon, a few real sweet districts that are darn near 100% public land. So it was just who could find the cats first. And so we had a quota of 12 and we had a female sub quota. And, that particular year was probably the worst. It was perfect conditions. And we had all three of those groups on the landscape and we opened it up. And I was in Libby with my biologist at the time, Jerry Brown, worked there for 40 years. Jerry was a mountain man and he knew everyone there. And I was in the office with Jerry at 8 o'clock, right? And opened up and the season opened and phone calls are coming in from Houndsmen. Hey, I know so-and-so got one here, someone down here wants it. You need to close the quota. There's too many by the time you close it down. Because when you close it, you got to do 5 o'clock the next day to give people a chance to come out. It's almost impossible to close it immediately because you got hunters all over the mountains, right? So we're like, oh man, you sure? We're like, 30 minutes into going to the office and turning the lights on. And I called the commissioner and Charlie Decker, and one of the founders of the Elk Foundation. He's one of the four, right? And Charlie's out of Libby, and he's a salty, tough mountain guy. And he says, yep. And he goes, I told him what's going on. He goes, close it. And I said, you sure? Yep. So I called Helena at the time to the wildlife division. And I said, hey, we need to close this district. We think we're already there 30 minutes into the hunt, right? There. What? And I said, yep, trust me on this one. So we closed it like less than an hour into the hunt. By the time the next day when all the cats drifted out, we had doubled the quota. There was that many people in the mountains and way blew by the female quota. And so that my point is there was too much of an interest, a demand from hound hunters and not enough supply in lions because, lions aren't high density on the landscape, right?
So what is the solution to that?
Yeah.
Limiting non-resident hunters. It seems to
Mhm.
vary by the area. In some areas there's there's an abundance of hound hunters and others not, right?
Yep. Yeah, it's a good question. So here in Montana, we went to the commission and it took a few years because we went to a limited entry draw. And what that did in Montana, state law is non-residents, whether you're with an outfitter or you're coming on your own, get up to 10% of that quota then, and that's it. And so it kind of really the non-residents take a hit. But the residents favor that because, they work all year to feed their dogs and if they didn't have it off, they wanted to have a chance to hunt a cat. So for years and years and years, we were limited entry and it hurt the outfitters. It hurt non-residents, but it really benefited resident hunters and cats because it was easy to close it down. But in the last year, the commission here in Montana opened it up a little bit again. And there's some new tools out there, with reporting and ways to limit some of the overharvest from non-residents. And so they're experimenting with allowing, for instance, a hybrid type season. So you have some limited entry permits where they're wonderful. You get them, you can have picnics. Your season's not going to end. You can hunt till the end in April, right? You can pick your snowstorm. So there's some of those permits because hunters love them. But also, if a quota is not met by those permit holders in December or the end, we start December 1 in Montana, then that gives the outfitters a chance to come back in again or non-residents if they draw a special permit, a separate one to come on their own. So the regs were loosened up a little bit last time, and I think they're going to work. It just hunting's a funny thing. You give super interest, at certain periods in time, and then, like you said, in some areas they're not there, and it's hard to predict.
Yeah, I saw a lot of pushback against that opening of regulations and a lot of the information that I was seeing because
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of commodification of so
it is.
it
Yep.
it's interesting with outfitting. It seems to be one of the few ways in which wildlife is still commodified here, going against the sort of new American model for wildlife management. Does outfitting fit into the future of hound hunting? Can predators can predator populations support the high number of harvests that need to be done if you're an outfitter?
I think they can. So outfitting's an interesting, it's a very tough business, right? It's very rural, very local, and very unpredictable weather, game populations, because your living is depends on, number one, your skill set of, surviving and taking a client and keeping them alive in the mountains. Very difficult. And for lion hunting, you're in some of the toughest country, right? And it depends upon the rules that a state agency, allows you to enter into the game. And I think there's a place, definitely a place for outfitters. They provide a service, for instance, that if you don't have hounds and you've always had a dream to kill a cat legally, experience everything, they're going to cook a meal for you. You're going to be put up. You're going to be safe. You're going to be taken care of. And there's a significant amount of people that want that experience. On the other hand, like you, there's a lot of people, backcountry hunters and anglers is full of them, younger, high energy. They want to do everything on their own, old school, the tough way. Just kind of Teddy Roosevelt called it a pleasant suffering for the hunt. It was he had another phrase too, but to do it the old school way. So yeah, it is commercialization. There is a service though that they provide and people want. And so both on private land and public land. So I think it can be done. It just, you really have to tweak the season type and find that sweet spot. And
Mm.
that's what Montana's doing right now. Idaho's a lot more liberal. It depends on the state and the commission's philosophy toward things with teeth and claws.
Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. It's a hard thing because on the one hand, outfitting is a huge boon to local economies,
Yep.
especially
Yep.
rural local economies. And guides and outfitters tend to be the best hunters with the best knowledge of that place and those
Yep.
animals.
Yep.
So an important resource for you, I know in your book, you're constantly, tapping into
Hmm.
these the most experienced people to get their information. Uh, but on the other hand, there's an element of elitism in that it's a commodification of guaranteed tags. You're
Yeah.
Donald Trump
Yep.
Jr., you want to go kill a lion in
Yep.
Montana, you go and pay $10,000. And uh, personally, because I don't have an interest in using an outfitter, it's easy for me to say that this should be legislated against, but I guess as hunters, we're wary of the infighting and the death by a thousand cuts approach that by only selecting for what we individually participate in, we weaken the movement in general.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think there's a needed place for outfitting in hunting, and they do provide a service folks want, and most of them do a really good job too. Bring people home safely. That's the number one. But it's stopping the infighting. You don't want to pit hound men against archers, against rifle hunters, against foot hunters. That doesn't do any good to 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 keep the privilege to legally hunt in any Western state, particularly for large carnivores, because there's a segment of society that doesn't hunt that really advocates for bears and wolves and lions, right? And frankly, the numbers are greater there than in the hunting community. So there's this constant sensitivity, constant awareness that as hunters we need to know, what we do when people aren't looking or when they are looking is going to dictate whether we have that privilege or not in the future.
In the scheme of the morality of hunting, which the sort of general public decides, and it's important to them for fair play. I can't tell you how many people I've met who I'm a rifle hunter for deer and elk, and I've met who are non-hunters and even not outdoorsmen go, oh yeah, I'm kind of keen on hunting. I was thinking I'd start with the trad bow and a flint, an obsidian, whatever, a traditional arrow point, like that, because that's highest up on the fair chase. Uh, do
Mhm.
you experience a moral difference in hunting predators versus hunting prey? In your
Yeah,
book, you're
yeah,
clear that
yeah.
you hunt ungulates, but because of your relationship with lions through the studying, I mean, you've essentially hunted lions, but you haven't, but you haven't killed them,
Uh, uh,
which many of the best houndsmen I know uh, catch and never, I've spoken to a number of guys who've caught hundreds of lions and bears and, never killed one.
Yeah, it's interesting. So there's the professional versus personal. So professionally, as a biologist and when I was a wildlife program manager, I've killed mountain lions, I've killed grizzly bears, wolves, black bears. I've signed, I was the one that had to say yay or nay based on my biologist's advice, and they knew what to do to remove a grizzly bear or whatever. And I've signed the death sentence on a lot of large carnivores, but it was for a reason. I never focused on individual animals. I focused on populations and habitats. And one important part of at a population level is society's tolerance for that, an animal that could potentially kill them. And so there's that balance. So some problem animals need to go to keep the rest alive. And some people can accept that and others can't. It's really a value, a human value. Do you like the color purple or do you like the color green?
Mhm.
Because science wise, there's amount of discretionary mortality in any population that you can take out, and that population is going to be stable or even grow. And so I've had to kill cats, but for recreation with a hunting license, I've never done it. Yeah, I've just, I've grown, especially with cats, like I said, I've killed them, but for sport out there in the woods, honestly, my time was, I'm not the greatest hunter. It was all taken up getting protein from deer and elk because, man, it took me
Right.
all season.
But
And
do you feel, does it come from a sort of moral or ethical place, or is it just a
more of
convenience
an,
thing?
no, for me with cats, for instance, more of an identity thing. I just feel that I have more of a connection with them, having spent and worked on them, whether it's setting seasons or tracking them or conflict stuff, my entire career, really. I identify with the cats. It's just something I haven't had the desire to do,
Mhm.
versus an elk or a deer. I'm ready to go out. It's our season right now, and as soon as we get snow on the ground in the valley, I'm gone.
Mhm. Mhm. We talk in the hound community. People often mention that in California, as hound hunting for bears and lions has been legislated out,
Yeah.
uh, the harvest by Fish and Game in California is actually higher than the previous private take. Uh, is you think that, is that dubious? That's the numbers I've seen. And is there a way to, because I imagine that when you're doing sort of depredation work or getting rid of problem lions and bears, that bear's going in the dumpster, right?
Yeah, it's so in California, and I get it. In Washington, Oregon, and California in particular, you have three large urban centers. They're going to dictate what everyone on the other side of the urban rural divide does. All right, whether it's LA and San Francisco combined, or Seattle or Portland. Then you have all the small rural communities on the east or the interior, right, that live on the land with closer to these animals. So there's an inherent conflict right there, kind of a social strife. Um, when California protected their cats, yeah, what it did, it set up their fish and game, California Fish and Game Department employees with almost an impossible task to still keep people safe and manage problem lions, whether it's with agriculture or people, and also, they probably have the greatest likelihood of a human lion interaction in the country because they have a lot of cats and they have the most amount of people, and they collide right there on the edges of all those cities. So you could kind of see that coming, and so they're going to have to remove cats nonstop. The ones that lose that innate fear of people that hang around that could take a pet. So, typically, especially rural and local communities, they're not going to tolerate that, and then they take things into their own hands, and that's the last thing anyone wants. Yeah, California's in Washington and Oregon, wherever there are restrictions on legal hunting for houndmen as the primary tool, it creates more work for the state fish and wildlife agencies, honestly.